My mother introduced me to her book club friends the same way she had been introducing me for about 3 years, as our daughter, the one we're still figuring out. She said it with a laugh, the kind of laugh that's supposed to make the other person feel comfortable, like it's just a little joke between family. Her friends laughed too. I stood there holding a glass of sparkling water and nodded like I'd heard it for the first time. I'd heard it maybe 40 times. I want to be clear about something before I get into the rest of this. I was not a mess. I was not struggling. I was not, in any technical or observable sense, someone anyone needed to figure out. I had a stable job, a lease I paid on time, and a savings account that my financial advisor, yes, I had a financial advisor, said was in better shape than most people, twice my age. I was 31 years old. I was fine. Better than fine, actually. But my family had a version of me that was fixed in place, somewhere around the time I was 22, and dropped out of the MBA program at Western, and no amount of evidence seemed to shift that image even slightly. The thing about dropping out is that nobody ever asked you what you dropped into. My brother's engagement party was held at a restaurant in Oakville. One of those places with exposed brick and Edison bulbs and a prix-fixe menu that starts at $95 a person. My parents had rented out the back section, maybe 40 people, immediate family and close friends. My brother Tristan had proposed to his girlfriend Beckett 3 weeks earlier, and our mother had apparently been planning this party in her head since before the ring was even purchased. I found out about it through a text, not from my mother, from Tristan. Hey, Mum's doing an engagement thing at Brassica on the 14th, 7 p.m. You coming? That was it. No other context. No, we'd love for you to be there. Or even a heads up. It's a bigger thing. Just the address and a time, like a calendar invite forwarded to the wrong person by accident. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He was my brother. I drove myself there from Toronto in a Thursday evening traffic that turned a 40-minute trip into nearly 2 hours. I had changed in the parking lot of a gas station off the QEW because I hadn't had time to go home after my last meeting. I walked in with my blazer slightly wrinkled and my good boots on and found my mother near the entrance talking to Tristan's future in-laws. And when she saw me, she did this thing, a quick, almost invisible reset, like she was adjusting her expression. And then she smiled. You made it, she said. Not so glad you're here. Not you look great, just you made it. Like I had completed a basic task. She turned back to the conversation she was having. I got a drink at the bar and found my way to the seating chart they had posted near the hallway. My name was on table 9. Table 9 was near the back of the back room, close to where the servers were coming in and out through a side door to the kitchen. It was a table of 6, and I knew exactly none of the other people seated there. I looked at the other tables. Table 1 was the immediate family table. My parents, Tristan and Beckett, Beckett's parents and Beckett's sister. Table 2 was aunts and uncles. Table 3 was my parents' closest friends. I had cousins at table 4. I was at table 9, next to the kitchen door. I want you to sit with that for a second. At my own brother's engagement party, in a room my parents had organised and paid for, I was seated with strangers at the table closest to the catering exit. I checked the chart twice. There was no mistake. I thought about leaving. I want to be honest about that. I stood near that seating chart for a moment and genuinely considered walking back out to the parking lot, getting in my car and driving home. I had a good book on my nightstand and a bottle of decent Pinot in my fridge, and nothing about this evening was going the way a normal person might hope. But I didn't leave. I put my drink on the table and I sat down and I decided, as I had decided many times before, to simply be present in the way I was capable of being present, which is to say, quietly. The couple to my left were friends of Beckett's parents from their sailing club in Burlington. They were friendly enough and asked me how I knew the couple, and I said Tristan was my brother, and there was a brief pause. You could see them recalibrating, wondering silently how the groom's sister ended up at table 9, and then they moved on to asking me about Toronto real estate, because that is what people in Ontario do when they're uncomfortable. The woman directly across from me introduced herself as Helena. She was in her mid-50s, I guessed, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the kind of no-nonsense posture that made me think she was used to being the most competent person in most rooms. She didn't say immediately how she knew the family. She ordered the salmon, asked the server 3 specific questions about the preparation, and when they answered satisfactorily, she nodded and handed back the menu with a small, genuine smile. I liked her immediately, in the way you like someone who takes small things seriously. We didn't talk much at first. Dinner moved forward the way these things do. Speeches, clinking glasses, a slideshow of Tristan and Beckett that included exactly 0 photographs of anyone else in my family, but did include a photo of our golden retriever Winston, who'd been dead for 6 years. The room was warm and loud, and I ate my duck confit and drank 1 glass of wine very slowly and watched my mother move through the space like she was hosting a gala she had been preparing for her entire adult life. She was good at it, I'll give her that. She was warm and funny with everyone else. She touched people's arms when she spoke to them. She remembered names and connection points, and she made everyone feel seen. She came to table 9 once, briefly, to check on the sailing couple. She didn't make eye contact with me. Sometime around the desserts course, my father drifted over. He was doing the rounds the way fathers do at these things, handshakes and shoulder pats and the occasional loud laugh. When he got to our table, he talked to the sailing couple for a few minutes, and then he looked at me and said, "You eat okay? Good." And then he looked across the table at Helena, and I watched something shift in his expression. A flicker of recognition maybe, or something closer to uncertainty. "Helena," he said, "good to see you. Didn't realize you'd be here." "Beckett's mother invited me," she said simply. "We worked together at Ham for about 8 years. My father nodded in that way. That means he's storing information he doesn't entirely know what to do with. Right, of course. Then he said something that I had heard so many variations of that I could have recited it in my sleep. He said it the way people say things they believe completely, casually, almost proudly, like it was just a fact of life being stated for the record. "She's our wanderer," he said, nodding at me. "Always doing her own thing, never quite landed anywhere." "But what can you do?" He shrugged. He actually shrugged. Some kids just take longer. I was 31 years old. I picked up my wine glass and looked at the middle distance and did not say anything. I had learned over many years that saying something in moments like this did not help. It didn't change the narrative my parents carried. It just made me look defensive, which then became another piece of evidence in the case they had apparently been building against my stability since I was in my mid-20s. Helena looked at my father for a moment. Then she looked at me. Then she looked back at my father. "I'm sorry," she said, in a voice that was entirely pleasant and entirely precise. "What is it that she does?" My father blinked. "She's in." "What is it, consulting?" He looked at me, actually looked at me, for the first time that evening to ask me what I did for a living. At his son's engagement party. After introducing me as someone who had never landed anywhere. "Health system navigation," I said. "I work with hospitals and regional health authorities to restructure how they deliver coordinated care to complex patients. Mostly in Ontario, some federal contract work." Helena set down her fork. "Which health authorities?" she asked. I told her. She was quiet for a second. "I know your work," she said. "I've read 2 papers with your name on them. One was on care transition models for patients with concurrent disorders." She paused. "That framework was adopted by 3 health units in the province last year." My father said nothing. My mother, who had appeared at the edge of the table at some point in the last 30 seconds, I hadn't noticed her arrive, also said nothing. Helena continued, not unkindly, not performing anything, just speaking the way people speak when they're saying true things. "The work coming out of that approach has been meaningful. The results for patients with overlapping mental health and chronic care needs have been, genuinely, measurably better." She looked at me directly. "You should be proud of that." The table was quiet. The sailing couple had stopped their conversation. My father had his hand on the back of an empty chair and he wasn't moving. My mother's expression was something I had not seen on her face in a long time. Not embarrassment, exactly. Something closer to the feeling you get when you realize a story you've been telling about someone for years doesn't match the person standing in front of you. I thanked Helena. I meant it. My father cleared his throat and said something about getting another drink. My mother smiled at the sailing couple and said something I didn't catch, and then they moved away from the table together, the way they always moved, in sync, presenting a unified front. Helena watched them go, and then she turned back to her dessert. Do they know? She asked quietly, not looking up. In general. About what you do? I thought about it honestly. They know the name of it, I said. I don't think they've ever asked what it means. She nodded slowly. Not with pity, more like she was filing something away. We talked for the rest of dinner about healthcare policy, about the particular challenge of getting hospital administrators and community care workers to operate from the same framework, about a funding model she'd seen piloted in British Columbia that had produced some interesting results. She asked smart questions. She pushed back on 2 things I said, and she was right both times, and I told her so. It was the best conversation I'd had in months. At some point Tristan came over to say hello, and he hugged me properly. Not the shoulder and arm hug my mother had given me at the door, but an actual hug. And he said he was glad I was there, and I believed him. Beckett came with him, and she kissed my cheek and said they were going to do a joint birthday thing in the summer, and she wanted me there, and I said I'd be there, and I meant that too. The party wound down the way parties do. People found their coats. There were long goodbyes near the door. I helped fold a few of the table cards into a small pile because nobody else was doing it, and it seemed like the right thing. My mother came to find me near the end. She stood next to me for a moment, looking out at the room as people gathered their things, and then she said, Helena seemed to think very highly of you. I waited. She's very well regarded, my mother added. At AAA, Anne, and elsewhere. She was on the Provincial Advisory Committee for Mental Health Funding. I know, I said. She mentioned it. Another pause. My mother straightened a centerpiece on the nearest table that didn't need straightening. I didn't realize, she said finally, that your work had been published. It's been published a few times, I said. The most recent one was about 18 months ago. She nodded. She picked up a stray cocktail napkin and folded it in half. I had spent years, genuinely, years waiting for a moment like this, waiting for the version of recognition that would feel like something, an apology maybe, or at least an acknowledgement that the story they'd been telling about me was incomplete. I had imagined this moment in different forms. Sometimes in my early 20s I had rehearsed things I'd say. Sometimes I drafted texts I never sent. I had wanted, more than I had ever admitted out loud, for my parents to look at me and just see me, not their version of me. Me, standing there in that back room of Brassica in Oakville at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night. I noticed something. The wanting was quieter than it used to be. Not gone. I'm not going to pretend it was gone. But it had changed shape. It was smaller and less sharp, and it didn't have the same pull it once did. Maybe because I had spent enough time building a life I was genuinely proud of that the approval had stopped feeling like something I needed to eat to survive. Maybe because Helena, who had read my work and understood what it meant, had said something true and kind in front of my parents, and it had landed somewhere real in me, and I didn't need anything else to follow it. I didn't want to have the conversation. Not that night, not in that room, with the dessert plates still on the tables, and Tristan and Beckett saying goodbye to their guests 20 feet away. Good night, Mum, I said. She looked up. Something moved across her face that I didn't try to name. Drive safe, she said. It's late. I got my coat. I said goodbye to Tristan and told Beckett her dress was beautiful, which it was, a deep green velvet that she was completely pulling off. I shook hands with some of Beckett's family near the door. I nodded at the sailing couple and they waved warmly. Helena was near the coat check when I passed and she handed me her card. If you're ever in front of the right audience and want a second set of eyes on anything, she said, I mean that genuinely. I thanked her and I meant that too. The drive back to Toronto was clear. It was mid-November, and the 4:03 was quiet, and the city lights on the horizon came up the way they always do, that orange glow above the dark, and I put on the radio and turned it low and just drove. I thought about what my father had said. Some kids just take longer. I had spent a long time being angry about variations of that sentence. I had spent a long time wanting to argue against it, to produce evidence, to make a case for myself. And some part of me still wanted to. Some part of me probably always will. But there is a difference between wanting to be seen and needing someone specific to do the seeing. I don't know if my parents will ever fully update the story they carry about me. I think probably they'll update it partway. I think my mother will mention Helena's comments at some point to someone, and it will travel through the family in the way these things do, quietly reshaping itself into a slightly different narrative. I think my father will ask me a question about my work the next time I see him, maybe, if he remembers. And maybe he'll listen. Or maybe not. And I've had to make a kind of peace with the or maybe not. What I know is this. I drove home that night and I parked my car and I walked into my apartment and I took off my good boots and I stood in my kitchen and I made myself a cup of tea. And I felt, in a way that I can only describe as quiet and real, like myself, not like the disappointing daughter, or the wanderer or the one who dropped out of the MBA program and never quite recovered. Just myself, which is the only thing I have ever actually been. The card Helena gave me is still on my desk. I emailed her 2 weeks later about a project I was working on. She responded within the hour. That felt like enough. It was enough. I've thought a lot about that night in Oakville. Not obsessively, I'm past that, but in the way you turn something over occasionally, because it still has texture, because it still means something when you hold it up to the light. What happened at that table wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. Helena didn't walk into that restaurant with any intention of changing anything for me. She sat down, she ordered the salmon, she asked the right questions about the preparation. She was just being herself. Someone who had spent decades doing careful, honest work and had learned, through that, to recognize it in others. That's the thing about people who take integrity seriously in their own lives. They tend to notice when it's present, and they tend to name it, quietly, without fanfare, because naming true things is just part of how they move through the world. My parents, on the other hand, had been carrying a story about me that was built on incomplete information and, if I'm honest, a certain comfort in the familiar. It's easier to keep a fixed idea of someone than to update it. Updating takes attention. It takes a willingness to say, out loud or even just privately, I had this wrong. That's hard for anyone. It was hard for them. I'm not sure they're all the way there yet. But something shifted that night. I could feel it. The story got a crack in it, and I think about what actually got me to that table in a position where Helena could see what she saw. It wasn't talent alone. I had known plenty of talented people who collapsed somewhere in the middle, not because they weren't smart, but because they couldn't hold the line when things were uncomfortable. The work I do is slow and often frustrating and involves a lot of rooms where people disagree loudly, and the political dynamics are genuinely exhausting. What kept me in those rooms year after year was something closer to stubbornness in the best sense. A refusal to walk away from something I believed mattered, even when the recognition wasn't there. Especially when it wasn't there. I also think about the choice I made in those early years, after I left the MBA program. I could have stayed in it and been miserable and emerged with a credential that didn't fit the work I actually wanted to do. Instead, I did something that looked, from the outside, like giving up, and used that space to find the work that was actually mine. That took a kind of honesty that I'm still proud of. Not the easy kind. The kind where you have to disappoint people who love you in order to stay true to something you can only partially articulate at the time. I don't believe the universe was rewarding me for being good. I believe that showing up with that kind of honesty, that kind of persistence, and that kind of genuine care for the people my work was meant to serve, I believe that compounds, not always visibly, but eventually it becomes something real enough that a stranger at a dinner party can read it in 2 published papers and say, without hesitation, you should be proud of that. I drove home that night, and I made my tea, and I stood in my kitchen, and I felt, underneath everything, steady. Not triumphant, not vindicated in some dramatic sense. Just steady, like someone who had done the work and knew it, and didn't need the audience to catch up in order to keep going. That's the only version of this story that makes sense to me now, not the one where I finally got the recognition I deserved, the one where I had already given it to myself, quietly, long before that night. And Helena just confirmed what I already knew.